Hi, this is lecture 11 on Kant's philosophy of the self in the critique of pure reason. And it's been a while since I presented lecture 10 on the, Kant's philosophy of the self. As you know, there was a pandemic, and I had a pretty hard time, as you were too. Let's go back to this philosophy. In lecture 10, I talked about chapter 5, the necessity of phenomenal self, and I talked about page 22. But today, instead of going back to chapter 5, I just would like to talk about my paper in general. Actually, this thesis, I think you have it with you, and it's been downloaded. It's been downloaded more than 26,000 times. So many people have read it. And now my view is closer to that of Professor Robert Paul Wolff, because he was chair of my committee, Bob Wolff and Bob Slave, who was an expert on Leibniz, but as Professor Bob Wolff wrote Kant's theory of mental activity, his interpretation of Kant is just the mirror opposite of Strawson's, and he defends transcendental idealism just as Henry Allison did. Well, Allison wrote his book in 1983, The Transcendental Idealism, published by Yale, and Bob Wolff wrote his Kant's theory of mental activity in 1963, so 20 years before Allison did. But Bob Wolff, 20 years before Allison, defended Kant's transcendental idealism, or Kant's transcendental psychology, very well. And in the critique, there's a section called Refutations of Idealism. Now, Kant talks about Descartes' idealism and Berkeley's idealism. And Descartes' idealism is problematic idealism, and Berkeley's idealism is dogmatic idealism, and Kant's idealism is transcendental idealism. I wrote them down here. See, Refutations of Idealism. Descartes, problematic idealism. Berkeley, dogmatic idealism. And Kant, transcendental idealism. And transcendental idealism is a refutation of problematic idealism and dogmatic idealism. So Kant tried to refute Descartes' idealism and Berkeley's idealism, but he didn't really reject idealism itself. So Kant came up with a transcendental idealism. So the Kant's transcendental idealism is a lot like a refutation of Descartes' problematic idealism and Berkeley dogmatic idealism. And P.F. Strawson, very distinguished philosopher and very famous analytic philosopher, he had a very analytic approach to Kant's critique of pure reason. In his Bounds of Sense, he denied Kant's transcendental idealism. He thought transcendental idealism or transcendental psychology is just academic fantasy. So Kant thought he refuted Descartes' idealism and Berkeley's idealism and came up with transcendental idealism. But Strawson came up with the idea descriptive metaphysics. As I said before, I think I said in lecture 1, Strawson does not use the term descriptive metaphysics. He used it in his book, The Individuals. But the Bounds of Sense is pretty much interpretation of Kant by using descriptive metaphysics, or Strawson applied descriptive metaphysics to the reading of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. So Strawson's descriptive metaphysics is a refutation of Kant's transcendental idealism. So refutations of idealism are like this, Descartes, problematic idealism; Berkeley, dogmatic idealism; Kant, transcendental idealism. See, Kant's transcendental ideal is the refutation of Descartes and Berkeley's idealism, and Strawson's descriptive metaphysics is Strawson's descriptive metaphysics is a refutation of a transcendental idealism, and Strawson thought he was successful. Strawson thought he successfully refuted Kant's transcendental idealism. But Bob Wolff thought, well, that's one way of reading, but transcendental idealism is the core of the Critique of Pure Reason, and we should not deny the transcendental idealism. That's how he wrote Kant's theory of mental activity. And as I was his student back in 1984, in the spring of 1984, I took his seminar on Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. My view is a lot closer to that of Bob Wolff than that of P.F. Strawson. Strawson's reading of Kant is fine in its own way, but I really disagree with him. He's denying and defying the transcendental psychology of transcendental idealism. And as I said, there are about 20 years between Bob Wolff's book, Kant's Theory of Mental Activity, and Henry Allison's book, Kant's Transcendental Idealism. The analytic philosophy was the trend in the English-speaking countries. Analytic philosophy is people who call themselves analytic philosophers were in the mainstream of the philosophy society in the United States as well as the United Kingdom. But after 1983, after Allison published the book, Kant's transcendental idealism sort of resurrected. And Patricia Kitcher wrote Kant's Transcendental Psychology. And my view is closer to those people. And as P.F. Strawson was a very famous analytic philosopher, and he had a very analytic approach to the critique of pure reason. His way of reading became very popular in the 60s and 70s. So Bob Wolff's way of reading Kant was kind of forgotten, but as I just said, it resurrected in the 80s, and as he gave a lecture series on Kant's critique of pure reason about 5 years ago. I think he gave 9 lectures on the critique of pure reason, and it became very well known and popular. And I thought I should be able to add something to his lectures. So my lectures are not just a review of his lectures, but my lecture series, you can take it as a supplement of his 9 lectures on the critique. Or actually, Kant wrote the Prolegomena after the critique of pure reason. And maybe you can use my lecture series as a Prolegomena to Bob Wolff's series on Kant's critique of pure reason. Now, since I've been away almost for a year, it's kind of hard to go back to the my thesis. As I said, I was reading while I was explaining my series on Kant's philosophy of the self. I hope you have it with you when you see my lectures. And I was explaining my thesis chapter by chapter. I just today talked about my paper in general, or Kant's problem in general. And the other thing is the objective of the critique of pure reason is, or the question Kant tried to answer in the critique of pure reason is this. The question is, how are synthetic judgments knowable a priori? And we have knowledge, not empirically, but non-empirically. So a priori knowledge is pretty much non-empirical knowledge, but it's not knowledge of empirical objects. As Kant said, we cannot know things in themselves in any way whatsoever. We cannot know noumena. We cannot know things in themselves. In other words, we cannot know non-empirical objects. So when he says we have a priori knowledge, that's non-empirical knowledge. We come to know things non-empirically, but the things we know are empirical objects. So don't confuse the two. We do not have knowledge of empirical objects. We have non-empirical knowledge of empirical objects. That's what I wrote. What Kant says is non-empirical knowledge of empirical objects. See, we don't know non-empirical objects. We just know empirical objects non-empirically. That's what you have to know. Some people are really confusing the two. Since Kant says we can have a priori knowledge, we can have non-empirical knowledge. Oh, maybe we can have a knowledge of non-empirical objects. No. He was talking about the way of knowing. The way we know things a priori, we know non-empirically. So the way we know or we come to know is non-empirical, but object we know are only empirical object. And Kant also talk about Kant often says, or he talks about the forms of knowledge. Like we have maybe 3 forms of knowledge, which are synthetic a posteriori knowledge, synthetic a posteriori knowledge, and analytic a priori knowledge. There's no such thing as analytic a posteriori knowledge. So he talks about three forms of knowledge, but what he's talking about is not really a form of knowledge, but a way of knowing. So one of the 3 ways of knowing is to know things a priori. How we come to have synthetic, how do we come to have synthetic judgments a priori. So Kant is really talking about the way of knowing rather than form of knowledge. That's what we have to know. That's what we have to, remember. So that those are the things you have to keep in mind when you read the critique. So by the way, the term a priori and the term a posteriori are not adjectives. They are adverbs. And Kant is using the terms a priori and a posteriori not adjectively but adverbially. Some people don't know the differences. Okay. So I'll talk about in the next lecture. I'll talk about the I explain the difference between form of knowledge and the way of knowing. Okay, okay. For lecture 12, I have to. For lecture 12, you might have to wait for a few weeks again. But I'll give you. I'll present lecture 12.